Every day, students spend hours upon hours studying for standardized tests out of fear that they won't pass a certain class, or out of fear that they won't even graduate. And yet, standardized testing has failed us time and time again and has proven that it truly does more harm than good. My first contention is the bias. Standardized testing was designed with a certain audience in mind, and the implications of this continue to affect student outcome. It's clear that wealthier students will have more resources, more study time, more money allocated towards their success, but many do not realize the extent to which this is true. The Wall Street Journal writes that in New York City, tutors are being paid over $400 to prepare kindergartners for the GNT gifted exam, an exam that can determine their future educational success. Not only would families of a lower socioeconomic status not be able to afford such preparation, but they probably wouldn't even know the exam was taking place. Tutoring follows wealthier students throughout their educational experience, and I can attest to this firsthand as a financial aid student, surrounded by peers that can all afford tutoring where I can't. It's extremely challenging having to work twice as hard to achieve the same grade when someone else has a tutor and I don't. Furthermore, better funded schools have more AP classes and more classes dedicated to standardized testing preparation, while worse funded schools, often dominated by Latinx and African American populations, simply cannot afford these resources. The schools that need the most resources are the ones receiving the least. Therefore, they cannot expand their curriculum or add clubs to give their students an edge when it comes to college, which results in a paradox. There's increased pressure on the results of standardized tests because it is one of the only means the students have of proving themselves, but they have the least resources to do well. The difference in some schools can be as staggering as $30,000 as opposed to $3,000 per student. The impacts of this are reinforced cycles of poverty and oppression, poor communities staying poor and oppressed communities staying oppressed. And lower grades on standardized tests can have a negative impact on a student's whole future. My contention too is quality of education. Standardized tests don't encourage learning, nor do they encourage personal growth or the overcoming of hardships. Instead, they encourage memorization, and they deprive students of opportunities to fully explore their passions or understand any given topic. Dillon 2006 writes that in Cuero, Texas, schools are doubling time spent on reading and math and reducing that time in other subjects. Marmol 2021 writes that in a survey of 299 schools, 71% are focusing their time on reading and math in hopes for better grades on standardized tests. Now, the purpose of the SAT and ACT exams are to test readiness for college. But even if these students perform well, students who have only taken reading and math, who can't find Honduras on a map or recognize the name Nietzsche, is this really a reflection of their intelligence or true capability? No, it's a reflection of their ability to recall, to memorize facts and figures. These standardized tests don't test or encourage critical thinking or creativity, and they limit a student's learning by controlling their curriculum. Standardized tests are actually hurting students' learning when they're supposed to be helping them. The impacts of this are narrow-minded students and the development of a society where citizens lack important life skills like creativity and like critical thinking because of a failed education system. So why continue? Standardized testing only reinforces cycles of oppression and poverty, and without a strong education system where everyone has a fair shot, we have nothing. Standardized testing is harming students, and it can no longer go unnoticed. Thank you.
Okay, 2-minute cross-ex. Let me just set up my timer. Is everybody ready? Okay, my time will begin now. You talk about biases about wealth and race, is that correct?
Yes.
Just to clarify, these biases exist within the whole education system and they're not unique to standardized testing, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and moving on to my next question, you talk about how it worsens the quality of education, and you talk about life skills, right? What would you say the burden of an academic test or standardized test to be?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part?
What would it be a burden of an academic test or a standardized test?
The burden of a standardized test is that it adversely affects a student's mental health and it prepares them for a test that virtually has no effect on how they'll on their performance in college or the future or critical thinking and everything I mentioned in my contentions.
Let me clarify my question. When taking an academic standardized test, what is the goal?
The goal of an academic standardized test? Well, there there are several. So, like the ACT and SAT, I mentioned that the goal is to test readiness for college, but they're also, designed to test whether a student, understands a topic.
Okay, so understanding topic, academics, math and reading, not creativity, right?
Right.
Okay. And moving on to my next question, you talk about how better funded schools equals more AP classes. Do you have a source for that?
I kind of just used logic on that one. Yeah.
So no evidence. And moving on to my next question about the quality of education. For quality of education, in terms of memorization and essays, do you use a skill of memorizing?
I suppose in, careers, yes, partly.
That is time. Okay, let me just set up my 4-minute timer. Is everybody ready for my call constructor? Okay, my time will begin now. Imagine you're a college administrator who had hundreds upon thousands of applicants with different grades, different GPAs, different teachers. How could you possibly compare them all and figure out which one is best for your college? Well, luckily, you have an answer: standardized testing. Hello, Judge. My name is Teresa, and I strongly oppose today's resolution that standardized testing do more harm than good. First, it accurately tests academic knowledge, and second, it causes the education system to improve. Now, moving on to my very first point, it accurately tests academic knowledge. Why? Because teacher grading is not only uneven, but it's also subjective. An A plus in one class may be a complete C minus in another, and teachers have different levels of strictness and guidelines. And according to Harvard Graduate School in 2019, they said that teacher grading was inconsistent, and students see 5, 6, 7 teachers every single day who have their own teaching styles, who have grading differences. How could students possibly know what skills are important and what is not, or where they truly lie? Students are confused. A bad skill in one class may be a great skill in another. An A in one class is a C in another. Because of this confusing method, standardized tests, on the other hand, are objective and have a standard. And according to Fordham University, standardized tests are designed to be objective from the get-go, with a similar set of questions and a blind reviewer. And according to the University of Pennsylvania, they call standardized testing a key tool for testing and measuring student knowledge, skills, and understanding, because there's a standard and objective method. Students don't have to be confused anymore, because now they truly see where their skills lie. For example, if they score bad on a math SAT, but really good on reading, they can evidently see what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, compared to 5, 6, 7 different teachers saying different things. No, so not only are we benefiting educators, because now they can now help their students with the objective data they have, we're helping students because now they have a non-subjective method. We're benefiting the entire education system, which brings me to my second point. It causes the education system to improve. Why? Because it pinpoints areas that schools need to work on. And according to a 100-year analysis of research in 2011 by Richard Phelps, he found that 93% of studies found that standardized testing had a positive effect on schools and education. And according to Brian Nixon, who's a head administrator of Whitby School District, he says that when he receives standardized testing data, he uses it to analyze his educational program. He uses it to reflect on curriculum and determine where to divert more resources. So for example, if you're seeing that one class is consistently scoring lower on standardized tests than another, you can evidently see a problem. Or if you're seeing a group of minorities or a certain group of people scoring lower, once again, you can see a problem. Also, you can compare it to other schools to see if it's something wrong that you're doing or if it's a nationwide trend. This system of comparing, checking, making it better, looking and checking will only improve our schools It calls more reform and better our education system. Not only resulting in better education because we're changing and making sure that our students are performing the best they can be, this also leads to better students and a better system. So Judge, for reasons of one, accurately testing academic knowledge, so students now have an objective method and data to be able to look at their skills, and two, causing the entire education system to improve due to a system of reforming and checking, the choice couldn't be clearer. Cast a combat in today's debate. I now stand for cross-examination.
Okay, so in your first contention, you mentioned that standardized tests are objective and that they were designed to be objective. But if the results of these tests show that students of color and less advantaged students are doing so much worse on standardized tests than their wealthier counterparts, does that just mean that they're less intelligent?
No, it just means that there are problems. And then because of this, we're able to diagnose the problem and find a solution. A doctor can't treat you for something they don't know that you have. So with standardized tests, this data helps diagnose the problem and start fixing it.
But do you have evidence that, using your analogy, that the doctor is actually treating the problem, that policymakers are doing anything?
So with standardized tests, there were actually a few questions that were removed because they're found to be attacking people of color. And because of this, they're able to reform a test and make it better each and every time. And also because of this, schools can easily see if there's a problem and a race issue or a class issue in their schools. And because of this data, they can easily find solutions.
Okay, but might I add that the results of these tests are still showing that students of color and minorities are still underperforming. So what you're arguing is that the test is undergoing reforms.
No, we're saying that a test is leading to reform and leading to good change.
Okay. Could you just reiterate your impacts really quickly, just to clarify?
Yes, so the impact of my first contention was that we're benefiting teachers, so now they can see where their students are at, and helping students because standardized tests are not subjective. So now they know what their skills are and can better themselves academically, which sets them up for the future. And my second impact for the education system improving was schools being better and improving and reforming and leading to a better education, better students, a better system, and overall better success for students if they have a great education. And I believe that's time.
Yeah. To address my opponent's first contention that had to do with the accuracy of standardized tests and kind of using them as an objective source of comparing students. When comparing students with standardized tests, you're not comparing their intelligence. Although you may need memorization later on in life, the point of standardized tests is to measure intelligence. It's to measure their capability and readiness for college, and they are clearly not doing this. They're not fulfilling their purpose, and they were never designed to benefit students of color, nor were they designed to benefit underprivileged students. They were always meant to give white students and wealthier students a leg up. And we're seeing this in the results of the exam. Now, it would be absurd for me to argue that students of color and underprivileged students are just less intelligent because of the results of standardized tests. And so what I'm trying to argue is that the standardized test is designed against them, and the results of it are proving adverse to these communities. And furthermore, no two students are the same, and it is therefore impossible to compare them using a single exam taken on a single day that does not consider outside factors or cultural differences or maybe parental support. And students are being compared without considering the student's personality or their ability to learn and take in information. Look, I agree with you that the concept of standardized testing isn't terrible inherently, but when students in public schools are taking an average of 112 mandatory standardized tests throughout their educational experience, it becomes excessive and detracts from their learning. And furthermore, a lot of private schools don't have to take as many standardized tests that public schools do have to take, which means that public schools that teach wealthier students as a whole face less consequences than public schools do. Now, to address your second contention, that it pinpoints areas for improvement, I just believe that the data that is gained from standardized tests is invalidated. It's invalidated because, one, there is a clear bias on the grounds of race and socioeconomic status, as I addressed in both of my contentions. It doesn't accurately measure any kind of knowledge. Again, your ability to memorize facts and figures, and it isn't a predictor of future success. The American Educational Research Association actually found that GPAs are 5 times stronger than SAT scores in this respect. And furthermore, it's not good at identifying whether students of a lower socioeconomic status are actually doing well. The standards are so much different between students of higher and lower socioeconomic status. Thus, I urge you to vote pro.
My opponent's very first contention was on biases. However, my opponent even admitted in cross-examination that the things that she brought up, like how there's a wealth gap and biases against people of color, were the whole education system in general, not specifically standardized testing. She even admitted this for herself. And in terms of better schools equal more APs and standardized testing classes, my opponent once again admitted cross-ex that she has no source. And in terms of how the SAT is racist, we're actually benefiting people of color and minority groups. And civil rights groups actually agree with the con. 12 civil rights groups and the NAACP stated that data from standardized testing is important to the civil rights community because they're an objective source of data and disparities. Once again, it becomes part of the solution. When we find a problem and diagnose it with standardized tests, they become the part of a bigger solution, which is why the NAACP, a major civil rights organization, sides with the con. And in terms of wealth gaps and how there's a bias based on your wealth, you can borrow free resources from a library or go to Khan Academy, but even if you do not by this point, judge. We're not only breaking poverty cycle, but we're spotting problems in society with clear data and becoming part of the solution. For example, breaking the poverty cycle. There was a girl named Liz Moran, and she was homeless and kicked out. But because of standardized testing, she was able to prove herself and prove that she was academically capable and standing out on her standardized tests. And because of this, she was able to get into Harvard and break her family's poverty cycle and get a good job and help her family. And two, we're spotting problems within society with a clear data to be part of the solution. Now that we have data about people of color and people of low class, it can be used to help find a solution. So in terms of how there's bias and inequities, I agree. We diagnose them because of standardized tests, and they're being part of the solution, which is why the NAACP even supports it. My opponent's second and final contention was about the quality of education. My opponent admitted in a cross-examination that the burden of an academic test or standardized test was to test your intelligence or your academic quality, not for creativity or critical thinking, which completely contradicts her point on how we need to learn life skills. If you want to learn life skills, let's go to an art club. Let's do extracurriculars. It's not the burden of a math test to tell you if you're good at art or not. My opponent also talks about memorization. However, my opponent fails to tell you that during tests, there's essay portions, critical thinking questions, essential questions. We have to analyze maps and diagrams. My opponent is cherry picking and only telling you about a multiple choice and picking A, B, C, or D. And in terms of quality education, standard tests are actually helping education to cast a calm ballot in today's debate, because with objective data, we're able to better education systems and compare one school to another to find the problems and fix it with better solutions. Judge, none of my opponent's contentions stand and thus cast a calm ballot in today's debate.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Here are the facts. Students of color and underprivileged students are consistently underperforming on standardized tests. This is not because they're less intelligent or because they're less capable or because they don't work as hard. Their performance on standardized tests is a result of the opportunities they've been given throughout their educational careers. And by no means am I arguing that standardized tests are the sole way that students are being oppressed. But I am arguing that they're furthering this oppression by giving them unfair standards to work up to when the test is designed to hurt them. My opponent is arguing that standardized tests are the best way to objectively measure a student without bias, but there's a clear bias in the questions and the fact that other students have so many more opportunities to do better. And my opponent's other claim was that it helps identify problems. But The data gained from standardized tests is invalidated by everything I've mentioned before, the fact that there's a racial and socioeconomic bias, by the fact that it doesn't actually fulfill its purpose. And another major part of my opponent's argument was that the NAACP supports standardized testing. But in a recent revision to their claim from 2015, they said, using a single standardized test as a sole determinant for position, tracking, ability grouping, and graduation is not fair and does not foster equality or opportunity for students regardless of race, income, or gender. So clearly, standardized tests are doing far more harm than good. And furthermore, abolishing them or even just reforming them would help far more people and than keeping them ever would. So I urge you to vote pro for the students who may think they're worthless after a bad grade on a standardized test, or for the marginalized communities who are suffering because of standardized tests.
I'll use the majority of my rest of my prep time for my closing. It's crazy to think how much my life has changed because of standardized testing. So that's Liz Murray, whose parents were crack addicts, who was kicked out of house when she was in high school, had no place to live. Because of standardized testing and a chance to prove that she was academically capable, she was even able to get into Harvard, breaking her family's poverty cycle and finally getting a good, stable job and having a purpose to live again. Hello, Judge. My name is Teresa, and I win today's debate because I'm the only one who has actually fulfilled a resolution, and I win on impact. First, let's discuss today's resolution. It's standardized tests do more harm than good. So let's look at a harm and let's look at a good. First, my opponent's harms. They talk about wealth bias and bias against people of color. They try to say about an NAACP revision. However, this revision was about all high-stakes testing in general, not specifically standardized testing. My evidence was specifically standardized testing. But Judge, even if you do not buy this, we're still helping minorities and still helping people low class. Because not only we're breaking the poverty cycle, but we're providing objective data to become part of the solution. And my opponent even agreed herself that it was not unique to standardized testing, and it was the entire education system. And now let's move on to the good. We're breaking the poverty cycle and helping people like Liz Murray find purpose in life again, be able to stand out academically and showing where they're at. And two, we're being part of the solution, and we're reforming and improving the education system in a chain of removing it, reforming and fixing. And we're giving people a purpose to live again. We're giving people a chance to stand out. And we gave Liz Murray a chance to prove herself when she was about to end her life. We're helping students and educators in a system of objective data be able to better help their skills and better help them. So not only are we breaking the poverty cycle and actually helping minorities and actually helping people in low class, we're the only ones actually changing the education system. We easily outweigh my opponent, and I'm the only one fulfilling the resolution. Cast a calm ballot in today's debate. Thanks.